Welcome to Chilling Moral, where darkness meets wisdom. Tonight we bring you three spine-tingling tales that not only scare but leave you pondering the mysteries of the unknown. Each story carries a chilling lesson, so listen closely if you dare. Let's begin. The black highway unspooled before David like a ribbon of dread. His headlights cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating nothing but the desolate stretch of asphalt ahead. The clock on the dashboard blinked 2 a.m. He was late, much later than he intended. But work had a way of bleeding into those precious few hours most people reserved for sleep. David massaged his temples, trying to knead away the burgeoning headache. His eyelids felt heavy, weighted down by exhaustion. He rolled down the window, hoping the blast of chilly night air might jolt him awake. It did, but not in the way he expected. A flicker of movement in the rearview mirror, a fleeting shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He glanced back, heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. Nothing. Just the empty back seat, illuminated by the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights he was rapidly leaving behind. Just tired, he muttered to himself, his voice a raspy whisper in the stillness of the car. He tried to shake off the unsettling feeling, tried to focus on the road, but the image of that shadow lingered in the corner of his mind. It wasn't human, not quite. It was too elongated, too amorphous, like a figure roughly hewn from darkness itself. Then he saw it again. This time there was no mistaking it. Sitting in the back seat, half shrouded in shadow, was a figure, a woman. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were two dark, empty sockets that seemed to absorb the light around them. David slammed on the brakes, the car skidding dangerously on the slick asphalt. He spun around in his seat, his breath catching in his throat. Empty. The back seat was completely empty. He stared for a long moment, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Had he imagined it? Was he losing his mind? The radio, which had been playing a static-laced oldies station, suddenly switched to a cacophony of white noise. Then a voice, a whisper that seemed to slither from the very speakers themselves. "You shouldn't have picked me up." David's blood ran ice-cold. He hadn't picked anyone up. He was alone. He had been alone the entire drive. Panic seized him. He slammed the car into drive and sped away, the engine roaring in the stillness of the night. He didn't know where he was going, just away from that thing that haunted his back seat. He saw her again in the rearview mirror, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her lips stretched into a grotesque smile. He tried to ignore her, tried to focus on the road, but fear had him in its grip. He spotted a gas station up ahead, a beacon of light in the oppressive darkness. He pulled in, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his wallet. He needed to get out of the car, needed to see another human being. He stepped out into the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station, his legs shaky beneath him. He glanced back at the car, half expecting to see the woman still sitting there, but the back seat was empty. He walked towards the glass door of the gas station, desperate for the comfort of human interaction, but as he approached, he saw it. Reflected in the glass, standing right behind him, was the woman. Emma stood in the musty silence of the basement, the single bare bulb casting long dancing shadows across the unfinished walls. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. Something indefinable but undeniably unsettling. Her gaze was fixed on a door, a heavy wooden door set into the far wall. It was old, its paint peeling, and a rusted padlock hung from its iron handle like a macabre ornament. It had been there from the moment she moved in, a silent sentinel barring entry to whatever lay beyond. The landlord, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of ancient secrets, had been quite clear. "That room," he'd said, his voice a low rasp, "is none of your concern. You're to leave it be. Understood?" Emma, being a woman of insatiable curiosity and perhaps a touch too much self-assurance, had agreed, all the while knowing she wouldn't. There was something about the locked door, about the landlord's thinly veiled warning, that sparked an ember of intrigue within her. It was a challenge, a silent dare whispered in the dead of night. For weeks she'd managed to resist the allure of the unknown. She busied herself with unpacking, with exploring the quaint seaside town that had become her new home. But the locked door remained, a persistent itch at the back of her mind, a constant reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden beneath her feet. Then the noises began. At first, they were faint, easily dismissed as the creaking of an old house settling. But as the days turned into nights, the sounds grew bolder, more insistent. Scratching sounds from behind the door, like claws raking against wood, faint whispers too low to decipher that seemed to slither into her dreams. And then, most unsettling of all, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor, back and forth, back and forth. Sleep became elusive, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that intensified with each passing night. Reason warred with curiosity, and Emma, to her own dismay, found herself losing the battle. One evening, armed with a crowbar and a flashlight, she descended into the basement. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the house. She stood before the door, her hand hovering over the cold metal of the padlock. Doubt gnawed at her, whispering warnings she chose to ignore. With a deep breath, she jammed the crowbar into the padlock's shackle and heaved. The rusted metal groaned in protest, then snapped, sending shards of metal flying through the air. The door creaked open, releasing a musty gust of air that smelled of dust and decay. Emma stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The room was small, barely more than a closet, its walls lined with rough-hewn stone. In the center of the room stood a single object, a full-length mirror, its silvered surface tarnished with age. Relief washed over her, followed by a wave of self-recrimination. It was just an old mirror, a forgotten relic of the past. She had let her imagination run wild, allowed her curiosity to lead her down a path of unnecessary fear. She turned to leave, but her breath hitched in her throat. Her reflection, the one staring back at her from the mirror, didn't move. Chapter 3. The Midnight Call. The insistent buzzing of his phone dragged Jake from a dream he couldn't quite grasp. He fumbled for the phone on his nightstand, his eyes still blurry with sleep. The clock on the bedside table glowed an accusing red 3 a.m. He answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello?" A voice on the other end, distorted and thin like a whisper carried on a wire stretched too taut. "Help me!" it rasped, the words stretched into an elongated plea. Jake sat up, suddenly wide awake. "Who is this?" The line went dead. He stared at the phone in his hand, a sense of unease settling over him like a shroud. Wrong number? A prank call? It was 3 a.m. after all. Nothing good ever happened at 3 a.m. He tossed the phone back on the nightstand, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. He closed his eyes, willing himself back to sleep, but the encounter, brief as it was, had left him with a lingering sense of dread. The phone buzzed again. He snatched it up, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hello?" This time, the voice on the other end was chillingly familiar. It was his own voice, but distorted, filled with a raw terror that sent chills down his spine. "Help me," his voice pleaded, the words broken, desperate. "Please help me." Jake's blood ran cold. He threw the phone across the room as if it were on fire, the sound of his own voice echoing in his ears. He scrambled back on the bed, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the call, for the intrusion, for the explanation. The lights flickered. His phone, lying on the floor where he'd flung it, buzzed again. He stared at it, his breath catching in his throat, paralyzed by a fear he couldn't explain. He couldn't ignore it. He had to answer. He had to know. He picked up the phone, his hands shaking. The screen glowed an eerie green incoming call unknown. He pressed the answer button. A voice, cold and devoid of emotion, hissed from the receiver. Thank you for joining us on Chilling Moral, where fear and reflection collide. These tales remind us that every shadow has a story, and every story has a lesson. Until next time, sleep with the lights on, and always question the unknown.